Holmes is a lovely seaside community located in the town of Comox on eastern Vancouver Island. Home to about 500 residents, the area retains a rural character and features some rare and unique sensitive natural areas. Both Garry Oak woodlands and an ancient sand dune ecosystem are found here, but are under threat by expanding development and poor land use planning.
Area for several reasons, and one of the really special parts about this area is the Garry Oak that grow out here, and they're not easily recognizable as Garry Oaks because they're small and stunted. They've been stunted by the wind and the weather, and this type of growth pattern is called Krumholtz. So Krumholtz means twisted wood.
The fact that Krumholtz oaks exist here on sand at the coast makes these absolutely wonderful and unique.
In Canada, Garry Oaks exist only in BC and almost exclusively in a narrow coastal strip along southeastern Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands. The Comox Valley has the northernmost habitat for Garry Oaks on Vancouver Island. While individual oaks with their gnarly shapes and unique adaptations to our climate are lovely, and their retention adds much to the beauty and habitat potential of developed areas, intact Garry Oak ecosystems are a diverse mosaic of plant, animal, and insect species, many of which occur nowhere else in Canada.
In amongst the oaks around here anyway are the same plants you would find in any other Garry Oak ecosystem. The typical plants, the Pacific sanicle, the chocolate lilies, twisted stalk. At this time of the year, we saw some false lily of the valley, many different kinds of plants.
Due to rapid and continuing land development, urban expansion, and invasion of exotic species, only 5% of the original Garry Oak habitat in Canada remains. Over 100 Garry Oak and associated ecosystem species are now at risk of extinction. If we want future generations to be able to experience the richness and beauty of our Garry Oak ecosystems, we need to protect and expand on them today. Another sensitive natural area that exists in Point Holmes is one of only 2 relict sand dune systems on the south coast of BC that date back to the end of the last ice age. The dunes are not only rare, but also fragile, and support plant communities not common on the coast. Dr. Kathy Dunster recognizes the intricate functioning of these ancient sand dune ecosystems.
These plants are performing a remarkable task of stabilizing these dune systems. At the same time, because the plant communities are quite unique, they're providing habitat for amazingly interesting and unique species. In fact, the plant community that we're standing in, the pine fir forest with the salal in the understory, there's only one other place that I know of where that actually exists, and that's over on Savory Island. So it's special because of that.
I do tell my kids when they were little we would come here, and I'd tell them they had to be quiet because the fairies live here. And it does feel like a magical place to me. It is one of the intact sections of the Point Holmes sand dunes, the old sand dunes, and it's one of the only places where you can see both sides of the sand dunes. You can really get a sense of what the whole Point Holmes sand dune area must have looked like at one time. It's one of the reasons why I feel passionately about protecting some of Point Holmes. It would be a shame to make decisions that inadvertently completely destroy the place, and I'm afraid that that's where we're headed. Now there's a push to reduce the size of the lots, and then another 20 years the people who buy those lots will say the same thing that we're saying now, which is, this is my retirement plan, I need to subdivide my lot again, and then it'll be so busy we'll have to widen Lazo Road, which will destroy that rural character, and we'll end up in a place that none of us, I don't think, really want to go. So if we're not careful and we don't develop a local area plan now, before it's too late, to say this is what we want to see Point Holmes look like now, and 50 years and 100 years from now, then the Magic Valley is going to disappear, and my kids won't be bringing their kids or their grandkids to this Magic Valley and telling them to be quiet, not to disturb the fairies. It'll be gone.
UBC geomorphology professor Will Marsh believes that to understand and protect the Point Holmes area, it's essential to understand the underlying formative systems that shape and impact this unique landscape.
Point Holmes is a unique environment in the Comox Valley. Not only that, it's a unique environment on Vancouver Island and really in the whole basin of the Georgia Straits. The question we have to ask is, why is it unique? Why is it so different from the other types of coastal environments around here? And the reason for it actually lies directly behind me. If we look out onto the open ocean, we see 10 or 20 kilometers or more of open ocean, and that corridor of open ocean is the corridor that the big storm waves from southeasterly storms drive up onto this piece of coastline. So what we have here at Point Holmes is a piece of shoreline that runs perpendicular to the advance of these big storm waves from the southeasterly storms that crash into the shoreline 15 or 20 or sometimes 30 times a year. And it's those big storm waves that set up the system that drives this whole environment out here. It is the fundamental system. It is the primary system. It is the formative system that shapes this whole environment. When these big storm waves crash onto the shore, they set up a vector of water movement and sediment movement. A set of waves called refracted waves and currents move in one direction toward Goose Spit, and another set of waves and currents moves in the other direction toward Kai Bay. That system of waves and currents is called the longshore system, and those waves and the currents drive the movement of sediment. The result is that little by little, this shoreline is driven inland. It's driven inland, eroded back, retreats by about a few centimeters, maybe 5, maybe 10 centimeters a year. And over the course of history, over several thousand years, it undoubtedly has retreated 100 meters or maybe several hundred meters. And in fact, the evidence of that we find in big boulders lying offshore that were once a part of the land base here that the waves and currents couldn't actually move. But there's another system that's working here, and this system has been working over the past 4,000 or 5,000 years probably, and that's the system of wind that picks up sand off the beach and drives it inland. The result of that has been the formation of sand dunes inland from here. And if we walk just 100 meters inland, 200 meters inland, further 300 meters inland, we find ourselves in these rolling sand hills, originally covered by, when settlers first came here, originally covered by Douglas fir ecosystems. They are the foundation of the landscape that we find inland from the shore here. And what is it that's unique about those sand dunes? Well, we all know what beach sand is like. Beach sand is very, very porous. And so those sand dunes have a very, very low capacity for retaining moisture. On the other hand, when rain falls on them, we find that virtually all the precipitation that lands on those dunes back there, under those Douglas firs, infiltrates into the soil and ends up going on down deep. So that great big dune field that lies behind us here is not only a habitat for the Douglas fir, but it's also an important groundwater recharge zone.
Architect Tom Dishlavoy is concerned about our relationship with the land.
Over the last century, our modern way of life has left us completely disconnected from the land that we live on. Engineering and technology has kind of created a false sense that all land is created equally and they can handle just about anything.
Judy Morrison is a Point Holmes resident with over 100 Garry Oak trees and several small sand dunes on her Lazo Road property.
When you live here, it's unique. Now you have wind all the time. That's why these plants exist. I was saying earlier, I admire weeds. They're tenacious. Garry oaks are tenacious. They have survived wind and salt and they've done a very good job at it. And they have weathered storms. If they could talk, they would have some pretty good stories. I don't think it's difficult to live with Garry Oaks, but the environment that created the Garry Oaks is what is difficult.
We need to reconnect the people to the land that they live on. One way to do this is by making more responsive zoning maps and OCPs. What we should be doing is mapping the existing systems, the drivers in that community, the watersheds, the environmental features, the sensitive environmental features. And then it's really only a matter of implementing a planning process where we put the most suitable forms of development into the most suitable pieces of land. This is what we would call site adaptive planning.
And in order to come up with plans in which we begin to adapt our OCPs, our local area plans, our site planning to the environment, we've got to pay attention to the way in which the environment functions. We've got to pay attention to the way the systems function. And we've got to make our land uses adaptive to those particular functions.